continues the series we've been having. I laid out the main schematic systems that language has for structuring conceptual content, and they included configurational structure, location of perspective point, distribution of attention, force dynamics, and so forth. And today is dedicated to attention and consciousness, and the first talk this morning was laid out a system of how language, the elaborate system that language has for raising attention on one thing and lowering it on another thing. But the issue arose that the methodology used for determining whether something was more salient or less salient, whether more tension was on it or less, was introspection. In other words, the linguist himself looks inside his own mind for his own assessments of what is the case as far as salience goes. And there is increasing challenge to that methodology raised by what are often called more objective methodologies. And so that, such as psycholinguistic probes and neuroscientific scanning mechanisms and all those techniques. So, and even though introspection is still the main methodology used in linguistics, increasingly objections are raised that it's not empirical or objective, that it can't be faulted or repeated. These are the hallmarks, so-called, of objective sciences. That it's inaccurate, that, and there's a school of thought that it's impossible to introspect on ongoing interaction as in the middle of a discourse, because it would distort the very processes that go on. So the task that I have, that I've set myself here, is to assess introspection and in effect to defend it. So the main finding, the main approach to answering these challenges that I'm going to take is to first, instead of simply dismissing introspection on these grounds, is to take an analytic look at the process of introspection itself. It, after all, does exist. It's a cognitive faculty. It's something that we as humans have evolved to have. So what are its properties? And the main thing that I've discovered is that, so the main finding is that introspection has a profile of things that it's better at and worse at. You sort of draw a profile of things that it's better at and worse at. And in fact, it's great at some things. In fact, perhaps indispensable at some. It's very bad in other respects. So where it's, and the problem with faulting, the people that have faulted it, is that they have perhaps indiscriminately mixed together the bad parts with the good parts without distinguishing where it's good and where it's bad. So my first task is going to lay out the profile that it has, and where introspection is bad, other methodologies will in fact prove to be supplementary to it or complementary to it and be much better. So, and in fact, if you look at them, every methodology has a profile, has its own profile, and it's better and worse at some things. Each has a different profile. Each might be indispensable for certain aspects of getting at language. And no methodology by itself should be considered the gold standard overall for language. Although I think there's a tendency in particular on the part of experimental psychology, to regard itself as the gold standard, but it's not. There are things it can't do. It too has a profile. So I've listed there a number of methodologies, 11 of them. I won't go through them, but they include things like introspection, comparative analysis of semantics and grammar and so forth, noting differences between different languages and different language modalities, such as spoken language and sign language, and includes all the other usual kind of seeming allegedly more objective methodologies, such as gathering data long-term, as in child language acquisition, corpus research, often computer-aided corpus research, where you have written down accumulated bodies of text, whether written or spoken. The experimental methods of psycholinguistics, the scanning techniques of neuroscience, the simulative techniques of artificial intelligence. Okay, so that's the basic approach, and so now it's time to give an introduction to what I think introspection is. To characterize it, you need to understand, to posit two levels of consciousness within a single individual. One is the first level of consciousness, which is the level at which various aspects of language can register in someone's consciousness at some kind of first level, and they'll do so to a greater or lesser degree. Some various aspects of language. So some things will register quite strongly at the first level. Let's say the meaning of something. Some things will register barely at all on the first level of consciousness, such as some grammatical pattern, let's say. Then there's, and I'm calling that the first level of consciousness, and you're going to be conscious of these various aspects of language. I think I'm using the term the readiness with which, how readily some aspect of language can register there in the first level. In addition, there's a second level of consciousness, which then has as its object parts of the first level of consciousness. And the second level, at the second level, you are able to volitionally direct your consciousness at some selected portion of the first level. And the elements of the first level will vary will range over a range as to how stably they can stay present under such scrutiny from the second level. So they will be, if some will be more intense and stable, and those will have greater, what I'm calling amenability to such inspection from the second level. Others will be elusive, frail, difficult, murky, and so forth. So I'm using the term accessibility as the combined term to indicate just how much some second level of introspection can, how strongly it can access some aspect of language. So that will be its accessibility. So something will have it'll either have greater or lesser access to some aspect of language, or some aspect of language will have greater or lesser accessibility to this second level of attention. So this second level of consciousness then, given that it's volitionally driven, selective as to which thing and so forth, and focused on that will, I'll use the word attention for, and in particular, when attention is used in this particular setup, I'll call it introspection, linguistic introspection. So all of this immediately involves one in the whole issue of consciousness and attention, and I think it would be better if I just go over lightly that whole issue and not go into great detail in our limited time, which fills up the rest of this introduction. But the basic idea is that attention and consciousness are of a piece. They're the same basic stuff. And I list in the introduction a set of parameters that can affect attention, that can relate to consciousness. Something can be conscious or unconscious. You can be interested in the consciousness itself or in the object of the consciousness. There are differences of strength. There are differences of quantity and quality, of quantity. There are temporal differences. Is the object of consciousness steady state, or is it shifting? And if it's shifting, is it on the increase or the decrease? There's a whole set of parameters. And attention, as the word is used in standard English, let's say, is simply consciousness with a particular selection of these parameters. So it's consciousness when it's focused and volitionally directed and stronger and so forth. But otherwise, it's simply a kind of consciousness. It's consciousness with certain properties selected for it. And also, just to make sure that I'm clear about this, I regard consciousness as well as attention as a gradient. So you can have, so the same terms, a set of terms will be used. Something can be in the center of consciousness or in its periphery. Something can be equivalent to that would be something can be in the foreground of attention or in the background, or high in attention or low in attention, or something can be salient of high salience or low salience. All of those terms are going to be equivalent. Okay? So I think that'll suffice. Let me just give like a quick example to orient people to introspection at work. Let's say in the course of discourse, you're talking along, one person is talking, and another person says, "I don't understand." Well, what's involved there? Here we have an actual online discourse. Well, the person who says, "I don't understand," has probably been all along monitoring the incoming discourse from the speaker, interpreting it, and trying to make some kind of coherent whole out of it. And he monitors the quality of its coherence. If at a certain point it feels to him that it's not so coherent, he might then say, "I don't understand." So this is an example of introspection. The hearer is monitoring his own experience of coherence of his interpretation of what the speaker is saying, finding it insufficient, and then there rises the wishing him to get it more coherent, and then he says, "I don't understand." Then when the speaker hears this, the speaker in turn has to immediately review online. This is online, this is all introspective, and this is in the middle of an actual ongoing discourse. Has to then review what he has just said and how he said it. And has to go back to the larger ideational complex that he wants to convey, and go find some other way, some other form to use to convey the same ideational complex. Or else he'll repeat the same mistake, or the hearer will once again not understand. So all of this is self-monitoring. It's a perfect example of introspection at work in the middle of discourse. Okay, so let's see. The next thing is section 2. Yeah, so let's go to section 2, which is on page 4 factors that affect attention and language. So the first factor is that there are some attentional phenomena which seem to run across individuals, that seem to hold across individuals, either because they're innately present, built into the human wiring of the language system, or because humans have some kind of common experience in development. And they would include things like that in hearing something, its meaning is typically more salient than its grammatical characteristics. So there will be a kind of gradient you can find across a range of aspects of language, and it'll be easier to introspect on the meaning of something than on its grammatical properties. Well, that may be wired in, and people will this difference will be pretty consistent across individuals. The next factor is that there will also be individual variation. Some individuals will deviate from this standard ranking of accessibility to consciousness, either because they've had training or because their individual innate wiring is just a bit different. I gave this example earlier in the sequence of talks, but I'll give it again because some new people are here. I worked on an American Indian language in Northern California called Atsugewi, and I worked with two different women. One woman was unable to identify. This language is polysynthetic. It has a verb root and many prefixes and suffixes in any given word. And the first woman I worked with could give me one whole word beautifully for the situation I asked, but was unable to identify any piece within it. And as it happens, this particular language has what's in the literature called an instrumental prefix. I call it a cause prefix. It has to be present. It tells you how you caused the action of the main verb. So, for example, to squash a bug is yet, but you can't say it by itself. You have to say how you squashed it. So if you squashed it by acting on it with your hands centripetally, like this way, you'd say, if he did it, you'd say yet. If you did it this way, hands acting manipulatively, yet. If you did it with your foot, ma'yat. If you did it with your buttocks by sitting on it, I squashed the butt by sitting on it, yet. If you poked it with a linear object this way, yet. Scraped it, yet. If you swatted it like a swinging object, yet. Okay, so it goes on and on. It took me a long time to figure this out, but the first day I went to work with the second woman, I asked her, how do you say, I shoved him away? And she said, well, if you're doing it with your hands, you'd say, now if you're doing it with your shoulder, you'd say, now if you're doing it with your feet, you'd say, So she immediately gave me an analysis of this prefix in this language, which I had to figure out by myself with the first woman. So this woman had, presumably in her innate wiring, due to individual variation, a conscious access to a certain aspect of her language, the grammatical structure of this gigantic polysynthetic verb. And all her life she'd been aware of its analysis. If I'd gone to her first, I would have found it out right away. So that's an example of individual difference. The third thing that impinges on attention is the hearer's current interest. If you're interested in food, you'll hear references to food. The example I have is if you're talking to your lawyer, you're likelier to attend, of all the things that the lawyer is saying to you, aspects of speech, you're likelier to attend to the exact wording of the lawyer. If you're talking to an intimate, you're likelier to pick up on the tone of voice. So that's the current interest value, and that'll shift as things change. Then finally, the one that's most important for this talk is conditions of attending. And I set up two conditions of attending, online and offline. Online is my term for when you're in the middle of an actual ongoing discourse with an interlocutor. And it has three aspects of attending to it. One is a preview, so like you might be thinking of what you're going to say next. There's a concurrent one, which is attending to what you're saying now, or the other person is saying. And review, thinking of what you, for example, a speaker has to think of what he's just said, and also consider the totality of the ideational complex that he wants to convey in order to figure out what to say next, which I'm doing right now. So that's kind of a review process. Then the offline condition of attending is can be either discursive, when you're sort of rehearsing something resembling full-blown forms of language in your mind by yourself. And again, you could have it like preview, like thinking of how you're going to ask for a raise from your boss, or review, thinking of how the job interview went, or concurrent, it just abets ongoing thinking that you have. And then the other one is what I call excerptive or autonomous form of thing. That's the that's the thing that's most objected to by what could be called contextualists. It's what linguists often do when they think of an example in abstracto, just in isolation, and say, well, if you said this. And that's often objected to by contextualists, and yet it's the mainstay of much linguistic analysis. So I'm going to justify it by saying that it too is part of our innate wired linguistic ability. We have, for reasons which I think are evolutionary, the ability to introspect on isolated, excerpted bits of language by themselves in isolation. Those are the conditions of attending. Let me start this profile of things that language is better or worse at, that introspection is better or worse at. And I will begin with and concentrate on this last thing of offline exertive introspection. And there's a lot of things that it's really good at. So the first thing that it's really good at, so I'm going to first list things that it's really good at, then medium good at, then poor at, and then can't do. So really good at, and the thing which I think language is uniquely, introspection is uniquely capable of, is ascertaining the meaning of something. You can't get at meaning without introspection. You can't get at meaning through corpus work. You can't get at meaning through neural imaging. I mean, you can image your brain, perhaps in the process of experiencing meaning, but how would you know that's what it's doing? You have to ask somebody, the subject, the person in the MRI, you have to ask him, what's going on in your mind? He says, well, I'm thinking of the meaning of goldfish. And only then can you correlate what the scan is picking up with something that the individual is reporting introspectively. So you have to have introspective reports, introspection of meaning, even to do some of the, in quotes, objective scientific prose. So it's best at meaning, and for example, of a whole phrase, if somebody says, my father built a log cabin, introspection enables you to think about the meaning of that phrase. You can introspectively think about, the way I'm setting all these up is if somebody should ask you something, or if you should initiate in your own head by yourself an examination of what do I think about, what your own introspection. And you can say, let me consider the phrase, my father built a log cabin, and think of the meaning you get, and you can think about it. You can do the same if somebody says to you the word bucket, an isolated word, and you can think of the meaning experience you get by hearing the word bucket. Same with a verb to plummet. Same with the verb, with the adjective happy. So these are the meanings of open class forms. I think I'll show later that closed class forms are what I would consider less good. Introspection is less good at accessing them. Another thing that's introspection is really good at accessing is register. So, for example, you're really good at saying, if you contrast the words stomach, belly, and tummy, you're very good at saying they mean the same thing, but that stomach is what you say, formal register, what you say normally. Belly is informal, casual, and tummy is what you would say to kids. So that's very accessible to introspection. You're very good at noticing what I call privilege of occurrence, or colloquiality. So, for example, you can tell that as between the words buy and purchase, buy is more colloquial than purchase is. It's what writers do all the time. They are able to introspect on filling in a particular slot in a sentence with exactly the right word. They're able to run through their minds what are the perfect word to put in that. That's something we're good at. Except that introspection is good at. Grammaticality, for example, and it's because we're good at grammaticality that all of Chomsky's grammar is built on this assumption that we have good introspective access to grammaticality. Without that, there is no Chomsky. So, for example, if you say last year you go there is no good, ungrammatical. But last year you went there is fine. And then conversely, last year did you go there is okay. But last year did you went there is ungrammatical. To any native speaker, it's instantly obvious that the first and the last are ungrammatical and the middle two are grammatical. So that those are grammaticality judgments, easily accessible to consciousness. Most morphemes are polysemous, and it's easy to quickly get some, but not all, of the polysemous senses of a given morpheme. So if somebody gives you the word stock, you can quickly come up with a few of the senses of stock, such as cattle or soup base or the stored inventory in a store. But you're unlikely to get all of them. But you're very easily going to get some of them. Yeah, so same concept. What's my example? Oh yeah, if annoy. If somebody says annoy, if you as a writer want to express the word annoy but want to use some other word, it might very easily come up with a few of such words like irk and bother and irritate and there's a number of them. Members of the category, for example, hear the word tool, you can very readily come up with hammer, screwdriver, and so forth. Conjunction of concepts. If somebody should give to you what is the word that represents a young female cow, you can easily come up with heifer. Again, it's just very readily easy to introspection. I wonder if I should at some point, you get the idea, I should at some point stop the things we're good at. Just to include a couple more of them that I can remember. If somebody points at something and says, what's that? Let's say it's a stork. A speaker of a language can easily say that's a stork. That whole cognitive process is easily accessible to introspection. And furthermore, the same is true for working with another language. If you know another language, or if I'm asking you in some other language, how do you say stork? As I worked with an Atsugewi speaker, she could easily say palak. Palak is. So palak is stork in Atsugewi. And she has no trouble accessing that fact in her language, knowing both languages. Okay, now let's go to things which are of medium ease of access for the offline exertive introspection. One is going to be closed class forms. So, for example, the meanings of for a free form like with. What's the meaning of with? Well, it takes you kind of hard. You can do it, but it's a little harder. Or the meanings of these bound closed class forms, such as unretestable. The the re, the obel. It takes longer, more effort. It's not so like a snap. You hear bucket, you know what bucket is. You hear re, you're not quite so sure. It takes a little longer, but you can do it. The lexical category of a word is probably such as hearing the word shallow and knowing that it's an adjective. It clearly varies with training, but even so, it's not arcane. It's not incredibly difficult for many people. The salience. So it's this one that I have to have in good working order in order to write a paper or a book on the attention system of language. I have to be able to introspect on just how salient something is in language. So I have to be able to introspect on the fact that hearing the word scurrilous in a sentence, that the word scurrilous attracts more attention than the word everyday would in the same sentence. I have to be able to discern that the concept of futurity is more salient in a phrase like on his upcoming arrival, with this word upcoming, than it is in the S of when he arrives, or in the will when he will arrive. That it's simply the concept of futurity is simply more salient in the open class form of upcoming. So it's introspective access to that this difference in salience that I will need to be able to write a linguistic treatise on comparative salience, on attention, on the attention system. But it's not impossible, but it's not as easy as getting the meaning of bucket. Rather inaccessible, but not impossible, are the semantic components that make things up. In my talk this morning, I took some time trying to show the different semantic components in the verb to pry, as in to pry a board off a wall. With a crowbar trying to pry a board off a wall. It turns out that there's 4 crucial semantic components. One of them is that you have to have something in between the figure and the ground. You can't just pull it off. Another is that it has to be stuck. You can't just flip it off. It has to come off gradually, or else you'll be popping it off. So there are various components that are present in the verb to pry. I consider that to be of low access in introspection. It's not totally inaccessible, but you really have to work at it, and probably do it in conjunction with your... in each of these low access cases, you have to, or you can, other methodologies come into play to complement, to supplement the difficult time that introspection is having. In this case, it's supplemented with comparative semantic analysis. So you can compare and contrast pry with other words, or pry in different situations. So I consider the situation, what if you have a wall, and here's this board attached to the wall, and you have to make up situations like it's not stuck there, but there's a handle, and you just pull it off. Can you now say, I pried the board off the wall? And the answer is no. You can only say, I pulled it off. That's comparative semantic analysis. You have to controlledly alter different components in the situation and see whether you can now say pry, or if in fact you have to shift to some other verb like pull. So you have to use your introspection into components in conjunction with semantic analysis. With polysemy, we found of easy access is getting a few of the other senses. If you hear a morpheme, a few of its senses, but you're unlikely to get all of its senses. That is already of low access to introspection. You might be able to if you try hard enough, but in this case, it's abetted by corpus work. And you can. It's another methodology. You can use your introspective ability in combination with going through corpora to see what are the various uses of let's say, the word stock, and then ultimately, or with asymptotic closure, you're going to start getting fewer and fewer new meanings as you look through the various usages of stock, and then you can pretty much just conclude that you've now gotten all the meanings of stock. It turns out that this corpus work, dictionaries are in fact a form of corpus work. They do exactly that. They collate through many records to see what the various things are. In this case, you abet your own abilities in introspection with coming up with different polysomous senses in order to, with corpus work, in order to get them all. And the same goes for other places that you have low access. You have only low access to, let's see, all the different words that mean something alike. Like I give the word annoy, and you can easily come up with a few words that roughly mean the same thing, sort of roughly synonyms. You'll never get them all, but a thesaurus will give you them all. And again, that's a kind of compilation. Syntactic principles. We have, for whatever reasons of wiring, rather low introspective access to syntactic principles. So, for example, if you have the two sentences, whose dog bit our cat, side by side with, whose dog did our cat bite? No native speaker is going to have any immediate intuition to understand why the first sentence has the word did and the second one doesn't. Why the first sentence has the present tense form of the verb bite, whereas the second one has the past tense form bit. Why the first one has the verb bite at the end of the sentence, while the second one has it in the middle of the sentence. No, it's almost inaccessible. I mean, I suspect there's various low-level forms of grammatical access. I'm sure there are. For example, I would say this second speaker of Atsugiwi did have relatively low-level access to some of the syntax of her polysynthetic verbs, or at least of its morphology. But in any case, it's relatively low, and in this case, it's complemented by another methodology, namely syntactic, comparative syntactic analysis, for which you need to use different aspects of your cognition. In all these cases, all these other methodologies still use your brain, but different aspects of them. They don't use the introspective portion of the language section of your brain, the language system of your brain. They use other methodologies, probably in their own part, also accessible to consciousness. I mean, in their own way, they are also introspection, but not linguistic introspection per se. You know what? I think, well, by now I could probably get the idea, and we could skip on to. So those are low accessibility things, and each of them is supplemented by some other methodology, such as dictionaries and neuroimaging and so forth. And then there are things which are completely inaccessible to introspection. So let's, for example, say that somebody says, "I'm staggering through my homework." I'm staggering through my homework assignment. Well, staggering is a kind of gait, like when you're walking, like when you're drunk. It's staggering. So, and it's not typically used in talking about working on your homework assignment. So it's some kind of metaphor, and it means presumably well. It's not a standard metaphor. It would have to have been made up on the spot, and I think everybody would have an easy time of understanding what it means. And on hearing it at first, you might, but it's not so clear of a metaphor that you would instantly figure out what the person's talking about. You have to do a little bit of work to get the metaphor, and quite possibly somebody, in particular somebody who's introspective by nature and is attuned to their language, might be able to get a few bits of how things have happened in their cognitive processing of it. They might be able to become aware of, introspectively of, or remember their introspections into first experiencing a kind of puzzlement of what it means to stagger through a homework assignment. Next, realizing that you have to do something to stagger, to the basic concept of stagger, to shift it to mean having difficulty in jerking through the different portions of your homework assignment, and finally realize that now they understand the full import of this metaphor. Well, it's possibly that much might be accessible to somebody hearing this metaphor introspectively, but they will never be able to get what processes, the actual processes that led to those realizations, or the timing of it, or let's just take the timing right now. They'll never be able to figure out how many milliseconds it took. And so anything that's below a second in timing, I would suspect, is going to be inaccessible to introspection. And this is then supplemented by things like psycholinguistic methodologies, which are best at sub-second timing on cognitive processes. So that would be supplemented by that. So these are things that would be inaccessible to introspection. I think in the interest of time, I'll skip the next section. The next section is that goes through the same thing about online. All the preceding was what is offline exerptive introspection good at or bad at, good, okay at, poor at, or unable to do. And as you can see, there's a profile for that particular condition of attending, namely offline, not in the course of a discourse, thinking by yourself, picking out some single word, let's say. You have to go through the same thing for all the different conditions of attending, and so the second batch of things does that. It looks through online in the middle of a discourse, and what is introspection better at and worse at? I mean, among the things that it's good at is you're good at knowing what the general topic or theme is of the conversation. You're very good at that. In the middle of a discourse, you know what you're talking about. You're probably good at introspecting, if you're the speaker, on what you should cue up, what you should say next. You're probably good at a hearer as queuing up to think what should you say next. There are various things that you're going to be good at in introspection that relates to this online, in the middle of a discourse, kind of linguistic interchange. There are going to be other things that are being low or medium in the access. I forget what I have there, but you can read it. And other things which are going to be completely impossible. So, okay, I think then I should skip to chapter or section 4. These are to give examples of a number of them that I've actually caught in progress, and then took a note of them, or others I've constructed, which demonstrate the presence of introspection in particular, I focus on online discourse because it's the one that's often in question. Is there introspection during discourse, when you're in the heat of discourse? And there are people who I call contextualists who would deny it. They would simply say that you can't introspect on it. And I, on the contrary, adopt the opposite position, that, on the contrary, you can't even maintain a conversation unless you introspect. And I'll try and give some demonstration of that. So that introspection is built into the very language system, just to enable it to happen. That you have to have a meta level of attention to what's otherwise happening linguistically, that you can direct your attention to see if things are going okay, to maintain them stably, and so forth. So, the first example is going to be, it'll be an example of, is it review or preview? It'll be a review, the review type of online thing. So let's say, and this I just made up, but it seems to make sense. Somebody's talking along, and then he says the former and the latter, or the first thing I said and the second thing I said, or the first one and the second one. Well, it's a meta-linguistic example, and in order for himself to understand what he even means, or for the speaker, for the hearer to understand what is meant, all of a sudden, the hearer, on hearing the words the former, has to put in consciousness in what is currently in working memory. So let's say his working memory of listening to this discourse has registered enough of the discourse, what came earlier, what came later, and can then, from that, let's call that saying that that's in the first level of consciousness, and then from a second level of consciousness can direct attention to the contents in this registry of what came earlier, which corresponds to the speaker saying the former, can then recognize the contents of that earlier register, and then can keep that in another short-term memory and can compare that with looking at the contents of the later thing, which is called the latter. So this is already just ipso facto, just by itself, is an example of introspection taking place in the middle of a discourse. And then another example of this is still the review type. I caught on the street a husband and a wife talking to each other, and I heard her say, "You said, never mind. Did you mean to say something else?" And I hung around a bit to see what they might mean, and it seemed to me that, as I pieced it together, that the husband had previously told the wife to that she didn't have to bother to do something because it was not important. And then later, he was complaining to her that she hadn't done it, even though he had said she didn't have to. So she says to him, "You said never mind," meaning it didn't matter. "Did you mean to say something else?" She's being rather polite about this. Well, what kind of work has to go on just to understand, for these two people to understand what's being said, for her to generate it, for him to understand it? Show that they're inconsistent, that they can't both be true at the same time, that he's apparently forgotten that he said never mind or changed his mind, and is now showing him that politely by saying, instead of saying, "What, did you change your mind?" Or "Are you inconsistent?" is now saying, "You said never mind. Did you mean to say something else, like this in fact matters to me?" And all this is done by elements that are kept in working memory at what you could call the first level of consciousness, where they're maintained there long enough to undertake this preparative process, and she's using a higher level of attention to look at these, enforcing the husband to do the same thing, to look at the contents of each part and to compare and contrast them. All this is going on in the middle of a conversation, and it's so natural, it's so automatic, that maybe the contextualists lose the fact that it's actual introspection that's going on right then and there. It would have to go on, I think. In the concurrent thing, if I might as well include it, for example, if somebody, if two guys are talking and one holds up a mattock, it holds up a tool and says, "This is a mattock." Most English speakers don't know what a mattock is. In fact, I didn't until I looked it up. Holds this up and says, "This is a mattock." The hearer might undertake a certain introspective act. He might take the introspective act to look at this conjunction of a sound, mattock, a sound, a shape, a phonological shape, and an actual object before him, and note to himself, make a mental note that the two go together and constitute a morpheme, and try and make a mental note to add this morpheme to his lexicon. All this is going on metalinguistically with introspection. The person is, some part of the person's mind, some part of the hearer's cognition is acting upon an otherwise level of linguistic phenomena taking place. Hearing the word mattock and seeing something, and is deciding to do something about it. Another example is this. My father and my son-in-law met for the first time, and he told him how young he looks. Well, you don't know which one said it to the other. You got he and he, they're both men. So a hearer at this point, hearing this, might become aware that the processing has hit a snag and leap to a meta level of introspection and notice that he can't tell, that he's puzzled. He can't tell which he goes with which person, the father-in-law or with the son, or with the father with the son-in-law. So, okay, that's another example of introspection at work. I can't repeat this one, but it's something I saw. I heard on the radio. It was a BBC reporter, and the woman tried to say these things were overtaken by events, which is a standard phrase. It's an idiom. It's a standard phrase in an English vocabulary. She couldn't find her way to that word. She kept trying to find it, and instead kept talking around it, kept coming up with other locutions that captured the same idea. But she was clearly looking to find that expression. Well, that's introspection. She's looking for a particular word, that's introspection, and she's got an idea in her mind. She's looking for the phrase which captures that meaning. She comes up with something in order to not have silence, just wait, everybody wait while she looks. She comes up with something, finds it inadequate, which is introspective, because she keeps the idea in her mind that she wants, finds this locution inadequate to the idea, discards it, looks for another stopgap of a locution that might fit it, and finally she just has done with it and just leaves it be. She gives up on trying to find the perfect locution. All of this is governed and guided by a second level, monitoring, assessing, manipulating the first level. All that's the introspective level, taking place in the online form of discourse. And this is the concurrent case, where it's taking place as the person is talking. It's concurrent. The previous set were reviews. This one is taking place as the person is talking. There was in Berkeley, where I live, and there's a number of schizophrenics are in the neighborhood and often stand on the street and speak. And you can tell that they're schizophrenic because, or at least presumably are schizophrenic because each fragment of speech seems to be unrelated to the preceding fragment of speech. But I was walking towards one schizophrenic. I could hear him talking from a distance, sounding schizophrenic. And I have a white cane, which I used as a white cane. I could hear the guy you can tell the direction of voice, look away, and I could hear him looking towards me, see me, look away again, and all of a sudden, in the next fragment of speech, the word blind was incorporated in the next thing he said. It seems like for some kinds of schizophrenic speech, whatever perception currently pops into somebody's line of sight, whichever way they're looking, or whatever idea pops into their mind, seems to determine the subject matter of a very local fragment of speech. But then some other one immediately gives rise to the next topic for the next fragment of speech. It could happen, very, very small amounts. Well, that's my conjecture that that's what's happening, and but this kind of thing doesn't happen when normal people speak. And my conjecture is the reason that we were able to maintain a single theme through a whole discourse, or at least through a sentence, or through a paragraph, is because some part of our mind is presumably monitoring what's being said, is keeping it on a single track, keep maintaining the theme uniform. And my guess is that if this is all true about this aspect of schizophrenia, it means that particular introspective monitoring capacity is probably impaired in schizophrenics. And therefore, you can use schizophrenic behavior in this regard as an index for, on the contrary, reverse engineering, saying that there must be some capacity which is there, which maintains our normal kind of conversation. Then for the, let's say the preview type, somebody at a party of people in their 50s and 60s, somebody came in and the host introduced him to someone else and said, he's my last high school friend. And he paused before the word friend. My interpretation, and it turns out he and this new person, the host and the newcomer, were never intimates, they were never chums. So what probably happened is he started off this sentence, he starts and he pauses, there's an actual pause there, he looks for the right word to use to correspond to the idea that he has in mind. Well, friend seems too close for the actuality that they were, good acquaintances, but that's all. And acquaintance, however, seems too distant. So there's no immediate word comes to mind. If he took more time at it, maybe he'd come up with the word classmate, or he might reformulate the whole sentence by saying, he's the last person I knew in high school that I still know, which is what he means. But what this pause shows is that there's, and he goes anyway, he just goes ahead and selects the nicer of the possibilities, that none of which fit. It shows that he's introspecting, looking ahead to use the right word, and pausing while doing it. So that's an example of a preview with introspection involved. A Danish linguist I know told me that when she first became a graduate student, I think it was, and her status increased partially from low status, but it didn't go all the way to high status. And her advisor, whenever she was talking to her advisor, they had a problem. To use Danish is one of those languages that has an informal form and a formal form. But the informal form seemed to both of them to be too intimate, and the formal form seemed to be too distant. After all, she was now halfway towards him in status. So what they did was they wound up reformulating their sentences so they never had to use the word you in it. So they would, instead of saying something like, do you have to go to class now? She would say, is there a class to go to now? Eliminating the whole problem. Well, in order to do this, each of them had to have forethought. Before uttering a sentence, they had to get in mind what they were going to say and introspect to find a formulation that lacked a you in it, so as to avoid the problem. So here's another example of preview with introspection. Okay, I think that gives you an idea of how introspection is a necessary part of language. Let me go on to objections raised. This will be section 5. Let me go to 5.2 immediately. So these will be a series of objections that, in other words, now that we've got a lot of examples of introspection at work, we've got this profile of things that introspection is better and worse at, we're in a position to address some of the objections raised by objectivists, empiricists, who I suspect are misperceiving the nature of introspection. So for each objection, I'm now in a position to give a counter to it. So the first objection is it pertains to consciousness, and they say since there may be no such thing as consciousness at all, consciousness probably doesn't exist at all. That's one position maintained by some empiricists. And your claim about introspection not only assumes consciousness, but it assumes it at two levels. Therefore, it's quite problematic. And I think the right answer to that is that objection is really beyond the issue of introspection or non-introspection. If you don't believe in consciousness at all, you don't believe in a whole lot more than just the lack of introspection. And if you do accept it, you're accepting a whole lot more than just introspection. So it's really a ground-setting issue, which introspection simply fits into as a relatively smaller part of it, and it shouldn't be raised against introspection per se by itself. On the other hand, with that said, it turns out that performing a fine analysis of introspection can be turned around and used as some kind of evidence for the existence of consciousness. an objectivist might say there's no consistency within the individual. You ask an individual at different times for the same thing, and they'll give two different answers. Well, the answer to that is that depends on whether what you're asking is within one of the things that introspection is good at, or within one of the things that introspection is bad at. If it's good, you're likely, on the contrary, you're likely to get clear consistency. So if you ask, for example, the same person on different occasions, what's the meaning of bucket, you're very likely to get a consistent answer. Because the meaning of an open class form is one of those things that introspection is really good at. However, you ask something about some syntactic phenomenon, you're likely to get mixed answers because it's one of the things that introspection is bad at. The same goes for another objection, which is there's no consistency across individuals, and to which the introspectionist would say, but there is, as long as you ask about something that's within one of the realms that introspection is good at. If you ask many different people, what does bucket mean, you're very likely to get the same answer, very close to the same answer. On the contrary, if you ask about some grammatical thing, you're very likely to get very different answers. So the objectivists' problem is they keep mixing together, grinding together what's good, what introspection is good at with what it's bad at, and they're not doing a fine enough analysis to keep the two separated. In relation to neural infrastructure, the objectivist might say, well, all this conscious stuff, all this introspective stuff with contents of consciousness, that's all very good, but it bears no relationship to the neural infrastructure, to neurons in a given subsystem of the brain, which, when active, you claim, give rise to some consciousness experience. There's no pattern there. Well, to which the answer is, on the contrary, the burden of proof is on you to show that there is no regularity across the two. You have to consider that if there were no relationship between a neural infrastructure and some contents of consciousness, then it would be on the burden would be on you, O objectivist, to explain how it comes about that there is that the contents of consciousness are themselves so regular, so elaborated, so consistent internally within themselves. Where does it come from? Is it a new emergent property? You might as well just say that those properties of conscious contents derive simply from a consistent form of neural pattern present in the neural infrastructure. Otherwise, for those who posit a radical split between them, it's for them to explain why there is any kind of consistency present in the conscious level. They say, well, okay, the objectivist might say, well, okay, let's say consciousness does exist, let's grant it. But why bother with introspection if you can get the same results, similar results with the other methodologies, and you get better ones and more consistent ones with them? Well, to which the objection is, that's fine, except there are some things that only introspection gets you. You get meaning only with introspection. You don't get it anywhere else. It's indispensable. You can't do without it. So there's no basis for saying, well, you might as well as use some other methodology. Yes, you might as well use it as a corroborator, for something that corroborates it, or you might as well use it. You definitely have to use it where introspection is bad, but you can't use it where introspection is best. Faultability and repeatability. Well, first of all, something is faultable. I mean, those are qualities, properties often cited to show that something is a science. Well, but it is faultable if it's in one of those realms where introspection is especially bad. So let's say somebody says something about syntax, which is really kind of something wrong. Well, it's readily faultable by comparative syntactic analysis, by one of the other methodologies. So it's readily faultable, but it's one of the bad things that's faultable. As for repeatability, well, again, one of the good things is repeatable. Every time you ask somebody what does bucket mean, you can repeat it. You get the same answer. So it's fully repeatable. This brings up something that is often said when you have. I come from a linguistics department which did a lot of field work, especially on American Indian languages, and often there was this phrase used, which was "never trust the native speaker." But it has to be understood correctly. It only referred to things like syntax. In other words, things where introspection is especially bad. A native speaker might easily say, well, you could ask, well, why do you say it that way? And the native speaker will come up with some reason, but it'll be pretty poor. You should not trust the native speaker for those. But those are syntactic things. On the contrary, you have to trust the native speaker for grammaticality judgments and for the meanings of things in the first place. In fact, they're the only things to trust. They're the only ones to get those concepts from the native speaker themselves. So it's when you say something is not faultable. Well, the poor things are faultable, and in fact, a field worker regularly faults the grammatical pronouncements of the native speakers after doing lots of analysis internal to the language. The final card in the objectivists' arsenal is to say, well, introspection is just subjective. That's usually the way it's put. It's just subjective. It's a first-person thing, and it can't be accessed by third-person things. But then the riposte to that, the challenge to that is, yes, that's true. Introspection is the first-person thing. It's necessarily a first-person thing, or it wouldn't be introspection. There is no third-person way to check on someone's introspection. It can't exist. Like consciousness, there's no instrument to determine if someone's conscious or what contents of consciousness are currently there. But you can turn right around and say to the objectivists, but so are you. So are you a first-person subjectivist. Because every objective scientific enterprise, no matter how objective it is, no matter how empirical it is, must use subjectivity, must use introspection. Because the researcher has to observe the data and assess it, has to figure out, observe patterns in it, and on the basis of those patterns, propose theories about it, has to then check out those theories, has to patch their theory and develop new theories. All of this is introspective. All of it is subjective. There may be parts out there that involve tangible, concrete instruments and so forth, which themselves in turn produce data. They may produce printouts, or they may produce meters with readings on the meters. But still, it's they that have to read what's on those meters, or read the printouts, and in the quiet of their minds, make sense of it. It's intrinsically introspective. It's intrinsically subjective. There is no science without subjectivity. So whether it's acknowledged or not. So ultimately, so that's the last riposte on the part of the introspectionist. It says, well, you need it yourself. So the task is, let's, instead of opposing each other, let's join forces and develop a science of introspection. Because even if introspection were not necessary, it still exists. It's an actual cognitive phenomenon. So it should at least be the target of scientific investigation, not simply dismissed, in order to find out how is our cognition working with respect to it. But from everything that I've shown here, it's not merely another cognitive phenomenon needing research. It's an indispensable cognitive phenomenon.